In my never-ending attempt to fill some kind of void in my heart, I impulse bought a few games on Steam again. Luckily, it wasn't really any money out of pocket because I bought a bunch of Operation Wildfire cases in CSGO back in high school for like 3 cents each, and now they run for a pretty penny right now. So I just use that. I call it my Operation Wildfire Fund. I've been looking a lot into games and how they build their stories and how they use mechanics to engage their players, and how I can incorporate that personally into my own personal games of D&D. It's just a little bit hard for me personally to kind of shut off my brain and just have like quote unquote like fun with something like a movie or anything. So to make it kind of like a research thing for me, it definitely is a good way for me to keep myself engaged with the medium. I like to take a page out of Ryan Amel's book and call this process like RD&D, so research and development for D&D. Anyways, the two games that I ended up buying was Clair Obscur and also Little Witch in the Woods, which is the topic of today's video. In the same fashion of how I buy books, I pretty much just like looked at the cover and I was like, that looks pretty cute, so I bought it. I didn't really look into what the game actually was or whether or not I'd have fun with it. Part of this is I have a fun time kind of gambling with whether or not I will enjoy a product. I try not to look into it too hard. Turns out this game is something that you would call a cozy game. It's even on the description on Steam. Historically, I'm not the biggest fan of this genre of games. I think most cozy games try to basically do what Stardew Valley did, just way worse. They saw that a game had farming and it was kind of cozy, and they took that and they were like, farming equals cozy. And I just think they took kind of the wrong lesson out of that, and they just don't really do it all that well. People might kind of go at me for this, but just Stardew Valley isn't even necessarily a game that I find personally fun. I think it's really well done. It's just not for me. Just for me personally, the game is just a little bit too slow. For example, in the kind of DM where I have a fidget cube and I'm just playing with it the entire time that we're playing D&D at a table for however many hours that we're playing, just because I need to personally always kind of be like moving or twitching a little bit. And Little Witch in the Woods just does a really good job of like keeping me engaged while I'm playing it, because it has, for one, it has a sprint button like that you get right from the get-go. It has like a meter bar with like stamina. And then they also just give you a broom really early on in the game, like a bad one. But the upgrade is really cheap as well. But so like very early in the game, you are whipping yourself around this map. And it feels good to kind of like navigate the map using this broom that they give you. It kind of reminded me of like when I was on my Game Boy Advance and I was playing Pokemon Crystal for the first time. You get your, the bike to travel around the map, and it just feels so much better to be able to move so much faster, I like moving fast. The main thing that I latched onto this game, and what I think that it does really well, is that they made exploration feel very satisfying in a way that I think a lot of like old games, and some games of now do very well, where they make it kind of intuitive while also giving you a bit of freedom. They give you just exactly the amount of information that you need to solve these puzzles, and in order to explore more, you do these very simple things, and then you unlock a new area where you have new creatures and new mechanics to possibly like gander at. As someone in the TTRPG scene, of course, I've seen plenty of discussion about how you can actually create puzzles and how to make engaging puzzles for players in, D&D or any other game that you're playing. Ultimately, I think it's a really important thing for us to discuss, because not everyone is going to be good at puzzles or enjoy puzzles exactly, but it's also something that you can't just necessarily take away, because some people might really enjoy that, and you could be potentially ripping away a very enjoyable part of a game for people. So by playing this little like witch game, I have kind of very basically derived a way that I want to tackle puzzles in the future, and I hope that you derive something from this as well. If you're looking for like puzzles that you can steal and put into your own personal campaign, for one, I don't necessarily agree with the idea of like taking puzzles and putting it into games, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I don't necessarily have that in this video. This is more me just talking about my personal theory of how I want to make simple, puzzles that my players can then solve. I think to actually have a puzzle be very interesting and invest your players further in your world, you need to consider 4 things. First, you want to think about what a puzzle is. Second, world building. 3, you want to do some demonstration. And 4, pacing. 1, what is a puzzle? What I mean by puzzle is quite literally by definition: a game, test, or toy designed to test ingenuity or knowledge. It does not need to be some kind of grand, big logic puzzle. It can be as simple as just, there's a boulder in your way, how do you get rid of it? all it has to do is kind of test your players' knowledge in some way. For example, in It Takes Two or Split Fictions or those kinds of games, they give you some kind of new toy or new mechanic, like a game mechanic, that you can then use throughout sections to solve different problems. For example, in It Takes Two, there's a section where you have a bunch of nails and hooks, and you're going to use that to actually platform through these sections. So when I am incorporating puzzles, it's mostly that kind of thing, because it's very intuitive for players to understand, and they can latch onto it and can slowly build up on top of that. 2. World building. I think like everything else in a game of D&D or a tabletop game, everything that you kind of put together and present to your players should further perpetuate the world building and kind of invest your players better into the world that they are interacting with. The thing I don't really personally like about having these videos where people have like puzzles, or even like the sites where people have puzzles, is just like 9 times out of 10, I can't possibly fathom a way at which I can alter that puzzle to fit my personal world building. Pretty much when I put a puzzle in front of players, I need to have a really solid why for them. Like, why does this exist in the world to begin with? When you take a puzzle from like those 3rd grade websites where it's like, you know, puzzles for 3rd graders, you very much run the risk of having a experience for players where it's like, why does this exist here? Or it feeling out of place. Like, players can definitely feel, I mean, they're adults, they can tell when something was arbitrarily placed in front of them just to kind of waste their time. You will get that kind of moment where you can see it on their face where they're like, when can I get back to the game I actually signed up for? So you gotta make it a little bit relevant. In Little Witch of the Woods, the puzzles are very straightforward. Essentially, you are playing as a witch and you are gathering materials across this map, and you are making candies and potions to solve various problems. To explore around, there's going to be like very simple obstacles in front of you that kind of make sense within the world. Say like a bridge is covered up by vines that have kind of been overgrown, or a plant is dying, that kind of thing. And if you revive it, you can kind of revive a path. They make it very clear at the start of the game that the whole world, like witches go around and they kind of help people, and they do like these kind of simple tasks for people by making potions and solving these problems for them. So you are part of that world. The first part of the game is all about trying to get into this old abandoned town that is covered in these like big vines, and so you spend a big chunk of it just trying to research what this vine does. You go from story point to story point, and you eventually solve it, but all of it kind of, again, exists within the world, and it's not a necessarily hard puzzle, but again, it helps the world building. You eventually get into the town and you solve it, using your kind of like worldly knowledge that your character would know. And it all helps to just serve to make the point of like what her role in this society is. And that's how I personally think that puzzles should work in a game of D&D, is that they should really just help sell or illustrate the reality of living in a situation like this. Whatever situation, your world is currently in. A small little bit of experience with this. In one time I had a players during a boss fight do like a hacking sequence on this Magitech device. And it was essentially kind of like finding a word bank through questions versus a word search. But it all made sense because they were breaking into a lab. They were basically solving security questions to get a password to then shut off some kind of machine in the middle of this fight. But that all made sense because they broke into a lab that was in the world, that was like a device that they had to use. They saw it get used before. None of that really felt out of place, and they've, never really got complaints about that. I've gotten complaints about other puzzles that I put in because they didn't fit as well as that one did. So the point is that you want to make sure that your puzzles don't feel out of place, they exist in the world, and they make sense, and they don't ever break your immersion exactly. You don't really want to pull them out of the moment. 3. Tools and demonstration. If you are going to have some kind of mechanic or puzzle in games, you should kind of play it off a little bit like a video game. What I mean by that is the game will introduce a new tool, and then it will somehow demonstrate how that tool is used to the players. It could just be a item description, it could be, an NPC using the tool in front of them, or it could be like a, tutorial section. Essentially, this is all tutorials, and tutorials kind of get a bad rap, but they are super necessary. The best tutorials you've ever experienced are the ones that kind of stay out of your way. They demonstrate how something is used without, kind of forcing you, You just need to have some kind of basic obstruction in front of your players, show them how this new mechanic is used and how this will solve your problems. Maybe it could be an existing spell that you already have in D&D, like Prestidigitation, that could solve some problems. Or you throw in them like a special item that they can use specifically for this area. Imagine some kind of imaginary scenario where your players are introduced to an area with this ice that can't be melted by normal means. Your players might experiment, they might try to throw some fireballs, they might try to, detect magic, figure out what's going on with this ice, to realize that they don't have the means to destroy it themselves. They can then be shown, say, like a set of other travelers pass by. They have a special set of wands. This wand lets them just pass right on through the ice temporarily as it temporarily melts it and they just walk right through. It's quick and simple, and now your players kind of get an idea of exactly how they are going to approach this specific little obstacle in their way now. They can either try to rob that group that just passed by, or maybe they go back to town, try to get one of those wands. But now you can kind of set up that obstacle in front of them more often, and they have an idea of how to solve it, even if it's very simple. I think why, puzzles feel very frustrating for players is because they're very often given puzzles without guidance, or even like simple problems and solutions without guidance. And sometimes it's because the DM wants them to kind of explore a little bit, but it's just really hard to explore in a game where you're kind of just trying to sync up your imaginations. You really, as a DM, have to kind of hold their hand a little bit and guide them to the solutions that you want, which could mean showing them how problems are solved through other characters, through a tutorial, through descriptions on their item cards. 4. Pacing and moderation. What I mean by pacing and moderation is you don't necessarily want to throw your players into the deep end of difficult puzzles right at the start. The reason that in my example, I'm talking about a extremely simple solution of having this like ice that can only be melted with a specific wand is because it gets your players to think about solving these problems with items in a very simple way. Then, as you continue on playing, you can actually add on little intricacies to that mechanic that make it a little bit more difficult to use and make your players think a little bit more critically. Then you can add a few more like prerequisites. Say for example, maybe the wand only works during the day, or there's a special other type of ice that doesn't work in the same way that that one does. Maybe it, instead of, melting the ice, it makes more ice like grow out. Soon you'll have very like intricate systems as your players like step by step kind of acclimate to a system, and your players are going to be far less kind of upset about being thrown into a system if they are given the chance to kind of grow and learn these mechanics with a game. In the same way that like a game kind of slowly introduces mechanics to you. This is a great opportunity if you have like big fights that you can introduce little mechanics into the fights as well. Let's say they are fighting an ice golem. The only way to destroy it is to destroy the core inside of its chest. So the players will take the wand one by one and try to, melt the center and keep it open long enough that the rest of the players can go and destroy it. By giving them a very simple kind of like problem and solution, you're giving them the satisfaction of learning at a rate that is good for them. If your players learn faster, you can start throwing more complicated things at them a lot quicker. If they're a little bit slower on it, then just kind of like acclimate them to it however they personally need. You can, of course, have obtuse puzzles, right? I like obtuse puzzles. I like puzzles that are a little bit frustrating as well, but I know that my players aren't necessarily the exact same kind of people as me. I like doing the New York Times puzzles every day. I have like a set of puzzle books that I keep near my desk if I'm really bored enough and I want to do those. But that's something that I do, not necessarily them, Essentially, what I really think that you should do is if you have puzzles, you just don't want to put the very obtuse, difficult ones as big story blocks in front of your players. The reason is that players will often get kind of frustrated if it feels like they are getting kind of like hard locked on a puzzle they don't understand that is very important to the main quest line. You could have like a stupid puzzle be on the side and be how they unlock something, like legendary off the side that they didn't have to do. For example, if you go back to like old Pokemon games, the Reggie puzzles back in Generation 3, there was a bunch of Braille and stuff like that that children would not understand without a guide. Like, they would not understand most of that. Like, if you can read normally as a kid, I forgot what year those games came out, you probably couldn't read Braille because you could see and play the game. So to learn all of that and then to like be at specific locations and kind of even understand after the translations what to do, those are a little obtuse, right? And so that's fine. Those are fun because it's something bonus that you can do. It's not stopping you from doing the main game. Okay, to summarize, I just really think that we should look at video games and how they introduce basic game mechanics, and how if you want to have puzzles, instead of thinking of them as like, oh, let's put a logic puzzle, let's put a riddle in front of people, a lot of the times, sometimes you put those kind of things in and they just don't feel like they fit the world and they're not intuitive for players to use. Because, you know, you're a DM, you have the world in your head, and it might sound intuitive to you, but if you really just give them like, hey, this solves X, that, you know, it kind of helps your players kind of acclimate to thinking a little bit more critically versus throwing, you know, let's say some specific kind of riddle. And also, if you ever do a riddle, just a quick tip, if your players have a better answer for your riddle than you do, just go with it. If you've made it this far, please let me know if you've ever had like some basic game mechanic or whatever, or like a puzzle that you enjoyed in a game of D&D. I am not saying that you shouldn't have obtuse puzzles. I'm just saying that introduce basic mechanics that your players can play with that are fun. Say them in the comments. I love reading the comments. It's like my favorite part of doing this right now. Anyways, bye. Thank you.